Welcome back to Big Riff Energy. Today I'm going to be talking about Divided by Darkness, the 2019 Spirit Adrift album. This will be a two-parter. In this first part, I'm going to sort of bridge the gap between Curse of Conception, the touring on that, the writing of Divided, and I'll talk a little bit about the recording. And in the next episode, I'll talk more about the recording and release and the touring in support of Divided by Darkness. I came slightly more prepared on this one. These timelines are tricky because usually with a Spirit Adrift album, by the time one of them comes out, the next one has already been written and demoed or close to being finished. Dave at 20 Bucks Spin, we had a running joke where on an album release day, he would always text me and say, "You done with the next one yet?" And more often than not, I would either have a nearly completed demo or, at least halfway to send him. And we would always laugh about that. So Curse came out in October 2017. We did a release show in Tempe, Arizona, and a release show in Denver. We need to get back to Denver, man. We used to play Denver as much as we played the place we lived, and we haven't been in too long. So yeah, we'll come to Denver as soon as we can. A lot of people have been asking about that. So back up a little bit before that. In September of 2017, when I was on tour in Europe with Gatecreeper, I went into a store in Glasgow, Scotland, and bought a couple of books. One of them was about Led Zeppelin. It was sort of like an unofficial-ish thing. And I was reading that on that September European tour. And they talked a lot about Jimmy Page and his fascination with Aleister Crowley, the chaos magician, weirdo, whatever you want to call him. And they got into how Jimmy Page went so far as to buy one of Crowley's old mansions and move in and get into that occult chaos magic sort of stuff while he was writing music. And I thought that was really cool. I'm as a creative type, I'm willing to try anything to get the creative juices flowing. I feel like it's always necessary when you're working on a new project to do something you haven't done before or push yourself in some way that you haven't before. I had fooled around with the Crowley stuff in Arkansas when we were living in the haunted house in the middle of nowhere. I'll talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to do a whole episode or two about that house in Arkansas. But reading this Led Zeppelin book sort of brought those memories back up. Man, I haven't done anything extreme like that in a while. I really started thinking about, I knew this album I was working on was going to be darker than the previous one. If Curse could be described in one word, I would say sad, And if Divided could be described in one word, it would be angry. I remember saying that in interviews at the time. But getting into this Jimmy Page Crowley connection and my past experiences with the Crowley system of whatever you want to call it, chaos magic and stuff like that, that sort of directed me towards this idea even further. At the time, I was called. Well, let me take a step back here. So we did the Curse of Conception album release shows in October, and then in December, Gatecreeper went on tour with Cannibal Corpse and Power Trip, and I know by that time I was deep in the creative process for Divided. I always write music first and demo music first, and then lyrics come later. And I know for sure on that Cannibal tour, I had bought a few more books on the Crowley stuff to refresh my memory on that whole thing. And I was in really, really deep with that stuff. I was also fascinated with Carl Jung at the time. I talked about this on a previous episode. So I was trying to find that common ground between the Crowley chaos magic and the Carl Jung depth psychology. And there's a lot in common there. It's really about plunging into your own unconscious and subconscious mind. They have various techniques to do that, both in the Crowley stuff and different forms of psychotherapy. one of the big things is taking a dream journal, and you have to start writing like the second you wake up or it goes away. And once you start doing that, things can start to get weird pretty quickly. So December 2017, for sure, I was deep up in that stuff. January 2018, both bands flew to New York to play at St. Vitus Bar. I'm so glad that I still have this picture. I've lost a lot of pictures over the years from losing different devices and stuff like that, and also just being a compulsive deleter of things. But I was on a flight to New York, January 2018, and I looked out the window and saw this image that just hit me. At the time, I was calling the album Deserted in Darkness. I had already been talking to Joe Patagno about the artwork. I have my beautiful sketch here that I sent him. I'm probably going to scan this in and put it on the screen so you can see how great it is in clear detail. But you can see where I erased the original album title and put in Divided by Darkness. That title hit me when I was looking out the window of this plane at the horizon, because there was a very distinct strip of like deep blue or purple, and then like almost a black dividing line, and then sort of an orange reddish hue. And really, I didn't even send Patagno that picture, but he sort of matched those tones on the final album art there. But the word divided just hit me. It looked like a dividing line. And Divided by Darkness really matched the message I was trying to send even more than Deserted in Darkness did. And I remember emailing Joe Patagno. We had established a super friendly relationship at the time. I love the dude. And I said, hey, man, I don't know how much this is going to affect what you're having to do, but I just wanted to let you know the album's going to be called Divided by Darkness. And Joe sent me this awesome little mini rant about how much better he thought that title was, and how, you know, man, there's psychic warfare being waged on us every second of every day to divide us and, you know, divide and conquer. And if, you know, I felt like it was a really relevant topic at the time. And if anything, it's gotten even more prevalent, especially in this country. We're in a war. We're in a psychic war with some pretty selfish, I think it's being generous just to call them selfish. You could call them evil people. But anyway, that's how I sort of found my direction with this album. And that was a monumental moment, looking out that airplane window. If you're just listening, I'm putting the picture up on the screen. And I don't know why that image is stuck in my head still to this day. So March 2018, we did the first proper tour for Curse, right? So you see how these timelines get very confusing, because I'm already neck deep in working on Divided by Darkness, and we're touring on Curse. That's when I broke my foot and we got Poison and everything. June of 2018, we went to Denver, played a fest there. And July of 2018, we did another a pretty hefty tour, still technically in support of Curse of Conception. And I'm sure that Divided was like fully demoed at this point. So I'll back up, and well, we did drums in December 2018 and did everything else in January 2019. So there's your fucking timeline. But I'll back up to the writing process. You know, got that Led Zeppelin book. That was sort of the first spark of, oh, I should go in this kind of creepier, more evil direction. You know, let's push it. Now I quit doing the chaos magic stuff in Arkansas because it got too weird and scary. Like I said, me and my bandmates, we had sort of like a Manson family type of situation going on in this really weird house in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas. It was on 33 acres. Our closest neighbor was a practicing witch. And I'll never forget the first time we saw her. We were going down the hill. It was a long ass, like bumpy, crazy dirt road to get to our house. We were going down the hill, and the lady from the cover of the first Black Sabbath album was standing in the middle of the road No shit. She looked just like it. And I was with my friend Craig at the time, who's now Michaela. And we were like, holy shit. Pulled up on her, and she was all vague and creepy. Like, she was playing up how creepy she was for us, for sure. And it was like something from a bad horror movie. She eventually told us, she was like, oh, it's so sad what happened up there. She was literally talking like that. And we looking at each other like, what is the hell's going on? Okay, what happened up there? Tell us. And according to her, the family that lived there before us had a daughter that was around our age. I was probably like 20 at the time. And I guess she committed suicide where we parked our cars, right? And learning that our closest neighbor is a practicing witch, and then learning that the people that were there before us, somebody committed suicide. I'm already like way into this Crowley stuff, taking these dream journals and doing all this other creepy stuff, mainly about focusing your intention, like I said, and subconscious and unconscious mind, and putting your focus on that sort of stuff to make things happen, and I'm not a believer in, like, I don't know, maybe I am, but when people start talking about energies and vibes and crystals and this and that, and the alignment of this and that, I'm not into any of that crap. I'm a skeptic. I'm a big time skeptic. But then when you're able to observe repeatable results of experiments and stuff like that, I mean, then you're kind of getting into like, okay, why does this keep happening? I keep doing this and this is supposed to happen, and then it happens. And it's repeatable and observable. It got creepy. We all moved out of that house one by one without really even talking about it. We were tough guys. We didn't want to tell each other like, dude, I'm too scared to stay in this house anymore. And eventually moved out of that house. And, I saw a guy get killed. I saw a guy get murdered in Fayetteville, Arkansas around this time. I've never talked about this publicly. I've barely talked about this to anybody. But like I said, I'll save that for a different episode. Point being, the further I got into this Crowley stuff, the creepier things got. And I told myself after that, I'm not going to mess with that shit anymore. I don't care if it's real or not. Like, if all of that was coincidence, that's still reason enough for me not to fool with this shit. But then when I read that book on Led Zeppelin years later, while I was working on an album, I said, you know what? I'm willing to do anything to help the creative process. I always try to push myself and do something weird, something I haven't done before when I'm working on a new project. So I said, let me start doing that again. I wrote Curse of Conception and Divided by Darkness, both in the same little 2-bedroom house. It was the first place that my wife and I lived in together. Cool little spot. When I was working on Divided and back into this creepy manifestation type stuff, I started having experiences that reminded me a little bit of what I experienced at that house in West Fork. And I'm kind of convinced that the previous occupant of our house in Mesa, Arizona, died in the kitchen. I got no real proof of that, but I was seeing figures out of the corner of my eye. There were a lot of late nights with the headphones on and the guitar, demoing songs from Divided by Darkness in the living room of that little place. And I would see someone walk by out of the corner of my eye, and it was so clear that I was convinced I had like disturbed my wife, and she was up walking around. When I looked, and there's nobody there. We had a pit bull black lab mix named Lizzie at the time. She's on the cover of Enlightened Eternity. She was tripped out by a specific spot in the kitchen. It was like she was seeing or smelling something that was there. And my mind started filling in the blanks and looking around, and like I could just see somebody collapsing, and expiring right there on the floor in the kitchen. She just didn't like this one spot. So that was a vibe working on Divided by Darkness. I was really making an effort to tap into the subconscious and the unconscious, summon up some ghosts and as much creepy, weird, scary stuff as I could. and put that in the music and put that in the lyrics, you know. So I've talked about the Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, Crowley connection, taking the dream journal and that sort of stuff. One specific moment that I remember distinctly, I had a whole title track written out for Divided by Darkness, and I think demoed. And it was a sprawling, progressive, sort of proto-thrash. It was a little more upbeat and a little more complex than what I would normally write for Spirit Adrift. And I felt like I was just forcing it. It was cool riffs, but the song itself, it just felt forced. Didn't really have a good flow, was sort of all over the place. And I remember one day I just picked up the guitar without thinking and played, and I threw the whole song away that I had demoed, because the verse riff from Divided by Darkness, I got so excited about that. I just thought it was something fresh and original and new and exciting. So I rewrote the whole title track around that riff. And that song became very special to me. Because as a creative type, we live for those completely out of the blue sparks of inspiration like that. And that's when you get your most magical stuff. So then I had a new song, and one night we were all in bed, and out of the blue, I think she must have been dreaming, our dog Lizzie howled like a wolf. And it was shocking and unsettling, and it woke us up at like 3 a.m. You know, I mean, literally sounded like there was a werewolf in the room with us. And I got up and walked to the bathroom, and I had all of the lyrics to Divided by Darkness. I sat and wrote all the lyrics from start to finish right there. I've heard that Salvador Dali would sit in a chair with like a saucer underneath his hand, and he would just rest his hands on his legs, and he would have a coin or something in his hand and sit in a chair until he crossed into the first stage of sleep, so that his hand would relax. He would drop the coin and it would hit this metal pan or whatever and wake him up. And then he would start painting or start writing his ideas or whatever. It's called the hypnagogic state. It's the state between waking and sleep. And you can really access your subconscious mind there. And that was one of those moments. I've had a lot of those kind of moments. And sometimes the stuff that you get from that state isn't that good. I've had some riffs that when I was in that hypnagogic state, I hope I'm saying that right, I would think that the riffs were great. And then I would go lay them down. I'm like, this sucks, and just get rid of them. So it's not always going to be magical, but a lot of the time it is. So that's a distinct memory I have of the writing process of Divided. I know another focus of mine at the time was to push myself as hard as I could as a guitar player specifically, but also as a singer, and just from a technical standpoint. And I was thinking a lot about Glenn Tipton from Judas Priest, because a lot of people that make it, a lot of musicians that, you know, hit the big time or whatever, they sort of plateau in their playing abilities. And they might be really good, but they sort of plateau. I would say most people do that. And I started thinking about Glenn Tipton and how do you go from Sad Wings of Destiny to Painkiller? And the guy just got better and better and better. And so did KK. You know, they were very competitive in a not so friendly way from what I understand. But Glenn specifically, to me, it was so inspiring that you could make British steel. 99.9% of people at that point would be like, I'm good. I made British steel. I made Breaking the Law. I don't need to get better. Why the fuck I need to get better? We just sold 18 gazillion albums And Glenn Tipton just never had that attitude. He just got better and better and better at guitar every single album, to where it was like an obvious improvement. And I was really focused on that, working on Divided. I tend to solo in what's called the pentatonic scale. It's a blues scale. That's the first scale I learned growing up. Jimi Hendrix uses it, Billy Gibbons, Tony Iommi. But then Tony Iommi too, he branched out of it around the time of Heaven and Hell and some of those 80s albums. I think he's a really competitive guy too, it seems, and he was probably trying to keep up with the Van Halens and those type of people. And so I wanted to do the same. I wanted to get out of that pentatonic scale. I always liked the Phrygian mode. Death uses it a lot. Metallica uses it. Uli John Roth. So I started really working on that mode and just kind of whipping my own ass, really whipping my own ass, running a lot, trying to get the physicality to an even better place for my vocals and that sort of thing. So I was just like all the way in. I can tell you that in 2018, I was either on tour or writing or in the studio. Between Spirit Adrift and Gatecreeper, it was nonstop. It was my whole life, And yeah, it was an intense period. That's the main thing I remember about working on Divided by Darkness. It was intense physically. It was intense psychologically and emotionally. There was all that mystical bullshit that I was doing. I was just really trying to put everything I had into it. I can talk a little more about this in the next episode when I talk more about the recording and release of the album. But my friend who I lived with in Arkansas in the haunted house, we were really into Alan Moore, From Hell, and that sort of stuff. And he had always told me to read this graphic novel, The Invisibles by Grant Morrison. And apparently when you read this thing, it's a similar effect to getting into creepy Crowley type stuff. It starts to affect your life. And it did. I was reading it when I was working on Divided by Darkness, and some really weird stuff happened with that. But I was reading interviews with Grant Morrison, who wrote it, and he talked about how it was a hyper sigil. I'll get into this in the next episode, but there's sigils, which the back of Divided by Darkness down at the bottom has some sigils on it that I made. And then there's what Grant Morrison called a hyper sigil, which is a whole giant complex body of work that is meant to have basically like a brainwashing effect on the people that experience it. And when you finish reading The Invisibles, you're supposed to burn it. In Divided by Darkness, in the liner notes, it said, for maximum results, destroy this record and all accompanying material with fire after listening, which I did after I got my first copy of it. I listened to it and then I lit it on fire and burned it. And I hope somebody else did. If you did, email me at bigriffenergy@gmail.com. And it's not too late to do it. I would suggest listening to this album, burning it, seeing if anything cool happens. But be careful. Be careful with how you focus your intentions, because if you don't know what you're doing, I think that the guys in Led Zeppelin sort of partially blame Jimmy Page for a lot of horrible things that happened to them and their families around that time. Obviously, nobody's ever talked about that publicly, but I've kind of put that together from interviews and stuff like that. So just be careful. If you're going to fool with black magic, be careful. Ask Dave Mustaine. He knows. Today, I'm going to talk about The Evil One by Roky Erickson and the Aliens. I was listening to that record a lot when I was working on Divided by Darkness. The most impressive thing to me about that album is the lead guitar. Let me grab this real quick. I don't want to screw the guy's name up. Dwayne Aslickson. He was supposed to produce the album, and I think the lead guitar player quit. And at the last minute, he said, well, I'll do the lead guitar. And it's, man, it's some of my favorite lead guitar ever made. Roky, I think the big connection with this album and Roky and Divided by Darkness is that he is a testament to losing your whole entire mind to your artwork. He was in the 13th Floor Elevators before he went solo. I'm going to hit my catchphrase. Check out the documentary on Roky Erickson. I think it's called You're Gonna Miss Me, which was a 13th Floor Elevators song. But the guy invented psychedelic music. 13th Floor Elevators invented psychedelic music. Texas on top, as usual. And then he went solo. You know, he got institutionalized and then he went solo. But talk about pulling from the subconscious and unconscious minds things that only you understand, but other people might recognize on some deep level. I feel that way about a lot of his lyrics. It's like, this doesn't make sense on the surface, but for some reason, some deeper reptilian part of my brain recognizes what he's saying as if I've experienced it before or heard it before. Yeah, I was jamming this album a lot. Highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite rock albums ever made. Sanford Parker, who worked on Divided by Darkness, he's a huge Roky fan, so that was definitely like a common thread between the two of us. If you listen to some of the riffs and some of the lead guitar on it, you'll definitely hear the Dwayne Aslickson influence. That's got to be the most underrated lead guitar performance of all time. It has to be. Especially for a guy that just slid in there last minute. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's an almost bulletproof album. I gotta say, I Walked with a Zombie sort of starts to wear on me. I find myself skipping that one, but I would say every other song is a 10 out of 10. Every other song. Even though the lyrics are borderline psychobabble, like I said, it stirs something in you in some primitive primal sense. It's just one of the best albums ever made. So that's my thoughts on that album. Hugely inspirational for Divided by Darkness. I'm going to hit part 2. That one will be out in a couple of weeks. I'll get more into the recording process and then the subsequent touring in support of Divided by Darkness. So there's part 1. Hope you enjoyed it. Any questions you got, email me, bigriffenergy@gmail.com. And we got a new song coming soon. By the time this comes out, we will be on our way to meet up with Midnight and Spider. So check out the dates, spiritadrift.com/tour. And hopefully we'll see you soon. And I will see you next week. New song coming.